Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. All you growers and plants out there. I know you guys are playing this in the garden for your plants to listen to and be like, hey, see, this is what you're supposed to be doing when I do this. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. And if you listen to enough Homegrown Helpers episodes and Growcast episodes, you know that. You know what we're here for too. We're here for your education. We're here to help you take those next steps in your garden and overcome some challenges, learn from mistakes, and ultimately just grow better cannabis, grow bigger cannabis, grow nicer, more cannabis, all of the above. So today's interview isn't necessarily with a home grower, but it's wrapping up our Coco for Cannabis series where I interviewed 3 growers that participate in the Coco for Cannabis challenges. You've heard Dr. Coco explain what those are, but real quick, they're kicking off another one. It's a plant training growing challenge. I know, Alice Plant Trainer can't be in it. Very poorly timed on all of our parts. We recognize that in the interview. But Dr. Coco does some amazing stuff, and if even if you don't grow in cocoa, you can participate in these grow challenges. So head on over to cocoforcannabis.com. Check them out. The next one is suggested to start up in just a couple of days when this goes live, August 15th. But the idea for them is to be able to flip on October 1st. And then to be done, the plan is to be done for January 1st and then start new seeds on the New Year's Grow Challenge. So this is an interesting interview. I love Dr. Coco. I love chatting him up. We ask a lot of questions that you don't typically hear him answer here on his interviews with Jordan, because it's so kind of pointed in the grower education. This is just a chat, 2 growers, like, what did you do about this? What did you think about this? How do you feel about this? So you get to hear the humble Dr. Coco explain the problems that he has and how he overcomes those and the steps that he thinks that everybody should take in order to mitigate, especially issues with bud rot in the garden. So today's show is brought to you by our friends at Sweetleaf, SUITELEAF.com. And you can use the code GROWCAST15 to save yourself 15% off their award-winning line of nutrients, their CalMag Maximizer, their Humate Blend, all of it. But also everything else that you need for growing. They have tents, they have lights, they have fans, controllers, mediums, pots, everything. And that GROWCAST15 code gets you 15% off all of it. So what else is going on? Well, we're doing a giveaway right now. We just launched it today. Greencraft Distribution. You get yourself, you can win one of 5 $50 gift cards to greencraftdistribution.com. You can, how do you enter? growcastpodcast.com/giveaway. We swap those over every 2 weeks, guys. So if it's been a little while, cruise back over there and it's something different than you've checked out before, submit. Only your email address and name get shared with the company. That's it. We don't collect anything else. We're looking to help these brands reach new customers and you guys experience new things with these giveaways. So growcastpodcast.com/giveaway. Without further ado, let's kick it over to this great interview with Dr. Coco. And this will wrap up our Coco for Cannabis challenge or our series. And if you're interested in participating in the next Grow Challenge, head on over to cocoforcannabis.com. Until next time, guys, happy growing. And welcome to another Homegrown Helpers episode with your host, Rob Smith. And I'm here with the one and only Dr. Coco. Welcome to the show, Dr. Coco.
Hey, thanks, Rob, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. You guys all know Dr. Coco from the many episodes of Growcast. He's also a regular contributor to our membership side at GrowPass at mygrowpass.com. We've got a regular Coco Corner, which we're going to get him into our Slack community on a regular basis. But Dr. Coco's here to do a Homegrown Helpers interview with me, and we're just going to try and get some of the information that, typically doesn't get asked of Dr. Coco. There's lots of grow advice, but I want to hear more about his grow and the trials and tribulations that helped him get to this point today. You up for that type of interview today, Dr. Coco?
I think so. I'm just chuckling because you're going to ask me about my current grow, my trials and tribulations on a day that I'm sort of feeling trials and tribulations. That's appropriate. got me at a good moment for
Perfect
this one.
timing. Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Nothing like kicking a guy late when he's down, right?
Yeah. Things happen. Things happen to everybody, I think, on grows. But I'll get through this one just as I've gotten through the rest.
So one of the things that I like to do on the show is kind of prove that out. Like, you know, I've said it before, this plant has an amazing way of humbling you. And if you ever feel like you are, king shit on Turd Mountain and you've got it all figured out, your cannabis room, your cannabis garden, your grow is going to come up and slap you in the face and be like, nope, you ain't got it all figured out today.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to hear, Dr. Coco, why don't we just start us off and tell us about yourself and your history with the cannabis plant and what kind of got us to this point today where you're helping people learn how to grow.
Okay, so Dr. Coco from cocoforcannabis.com. We started cocoforcannabis.com just about 2 years ago, really out of kind of a frustration about the inconsistent information that was available to home growers about sort of the science of growing cannabis. So with my partner, Dr. Photon, we decided that we would sort of take this on. I wrote a book, Coco for Cannabis, A Grower's Guide, that was published in the summer of 2018. And I was sort of starting a website to support the book. And then Dr. Photon and I decided to collaborate and really blow the website up into a full-on resource that users could use as sort of a standalone piece. So that's been my sort of passion for the last couple of years has been building, developing, and sort of growing cocoforcannabis.com. I think like a lot of growers, I have a sort of long history with cannabis use, and really self-medicating with it for treatment of my arthritis. In particular, and that actually became prescribed for me a few years ago when I was in grad school, working on my dissertation, and my arthritis was getting really bad, just sort of it's stress induced. My insurance at the time stopped paying for the very expensive biologics medicine that I had been taking. And my rheumatologist, we were sort of casting about for options. And he recommended that I consider trying cannabis. I had actually been on sort of a break from cannabis at that time, and it was sort of dumbfounding to me that he is recommending this. Well, I was really under the impression at that point that getting a medical cannabis was something that you had to sort of initiate for yourself and go to a special doctor that would prescribe it for you and all these things. I was not expecting my sort of, my rheumatologist to bring it up on his own. And then in sort of thinking back, because I had taken several sort of breaks from cannabis during grad school and at other points in my life. And I sort of thought back to my history with arthritis, and there certainly seemed to be a correlation there. When I had been using cannabis, the arthritis symptoms were not as bad, or I didn't have the same sort of acute flare-ups with it. So that's when I sort of started getting back into cannabis. Initially was just going to dispensaries. Once I became in a situation where I was able to, I started to grow my own. I was just talking to you in a different setting about, my background as an academic. I work with farmers. I do research with farmers in Mexico and Central America, and have been working with farmers for years, sort of looking at other aspects of things. Part of what I look at is the economics of peasant farming and the community and the collaboration that exists amongst farmers. And so I tried to, I had a background in farming and in gardening. I had taught horticultural classes at the university. And when I got into my own indoor gardening, this was sort of my first foray into indoor cultivation. And did a lot of sort of perusing of the online information and forums, and joined a couple of forums and was sort of active in them, but really discouraged by a lot of the bro science, a lot of the sort of inconsistent information that was available. And so that led us into sort of diving deeper into things. That's what led to Coco for Cannabis, the book, to really sort of hammer out how cocoa should be run in a high frequency fertigation setting for growing cannabis. And that, like I said, just sort of ballooned or snowballed into everything that we're doing at this point.
Awesome. Now, I have questions about the how did you land on cocoa? What was the process that got you the Dr. Coco name and not the Dr. KNF or Dr. Organic or Dr. Hydro?
Yeah, so thinking about different grow styles, my background is really closer to outdoor organic, biodynamic, agroecological models. Although a lot of the farmers that I work with in Central America don't fully practice sort of what a lot of sort of U.S. agronomists or environmental researchers would refer to as biodynamic farming. That's sort of the model that they're moving out of and that they're closer to. And coming to indoor agriculture, indoor horticulture, it immediately occurred to me that the cost benefits are really different in an indoor setting. When we're thinking about outdoor agriculture, your biggest sort of environmental concerns are things like runoff from fertilizers, soil degradation, erosion, soil health, other issues like that you need to manage effectively as a farmer. When you're growing indoors, your biggest environmental impact is electricity use for running your light. And running air conditioners, your dehumidifiers, your other climate control systems if you have to run that. But for everybody, it's running that light. And so I think that the cost benefit analysis is coming strictly sort of from the environmental perspective. And I've gotten myself in trouble for making this argument before, I will say. But coming strictly from the environmental perspective, I think there are real environmental arguments to be made for growing hydroponically. And cocoa is a style of hydroponic growing in an indoor setting, simply because the time that we run. So a lot of growers are familiar with the gram per watt, which is really sort of an odd metric to have ever used. But if we think about it in terms of a kilowatt per gram, if you think about it in terms of the total amount of electricity used over the course of a grow per the amount of harvest that you're able to receive, I'm of the opinion and sort of have a lot of data to support that you can do much better on your kilowatt or your grams per kilowatt in a cocoa grow than you can in on average in a soil grow. Certainly that's been the case for me. I can get sort of a lot of cannabis out of my tent in a shorter period of time. So that means that I'm running the lights less and ultimately using less electricity to support my grow. A lot of people are really concerned with some of the environmental impacts of using conventional fertilizers, especially the runoff water. And I agree that is a concern. So I try to limit that. I've really tried to dive into understanding how much runoff that we need, how to sort of mix a nutrient element ratio that really avoids creating lockouts that require excessive flushing, that really require less runoff on a daily basis.
Right.
But it does generate some runoff, and that runoff imposes a cost. Ultimately, that cost, again, is electricity. It depends on how you're processing the runoff, but a lot of growers are draining their runoff water in with municipal drainage, which means that it gets filtered at your municipal wastewater filtration system. And adding those nitrates and phosphates increases the difficulty of filtering that water and imposes an electricity cost, essentially, on the wastewater treatment facility. But that electricity cost is, I believe, smaller than what we sort of save in increasing the growth. In terms of teaching other growers how to grow, it's a lot easier to follow a method in cocoa than it is to sort of follow a method in biodynamic or in living soils or in other things like this. Although you can certainly do that, it's just a lot easier to have consistent, reliable results with a hydroponic setup in cocoa. So I feel really confident in being able to introduce a brand new grower that has no experience with indoor horticulture or really growing plants at all, and giving them a really specific protocol that they can follow on a daily basis. And they will have good results, and they will be able to harvest a good harvest at the end of that in a way that I think the success rate would be, especially for brand new growers with sort of no background in indoor horticulture, far lower. And sort of, I see it far lower when I see growers trying other sort of techniques or following other protocols. So we have a really good track record of, taking growers on their first grow and generating sort of Instagram-worthy harvests from that. And when you think again about the environmental benefits, no matter how much you save in sort of, or how much you think you're saving in all of the sort of environmental aspects of this, if you don't get to a successful harvest, it was all wasted. So I think that when you're really thinking carefully about sort of the cost benefits of these different styles of growing, the argument for hydroponics is a lot stronger on the environmental side than a lot of people sort of give it credit for.
Cool. Awesome. What's up, everyone? We have to take a quick break and thank acinfinity.com for being such an amazing partner for us. You've heard it on the show. You've heard it on Growcast. You've seen it in Jordan's Instagram of his grow. We're kicking off some YouTube videos pretty soon. But AC Infinity is the cat's meow, guys. They are just amazing. Whisper quiet, fully controllable, settable, functional, and they stand behind them. You can save 15% off all of the grow room supplies that AC Infinity offers. The fans, the ducting, the tape, the wires, all of it. acinfinity.com, Growcast15. That's it. Enjoy. Why don't we shift gears a little bit, and why don't you tell us about your current grow setup? We know that you test a lot of lights and test a lot of equipment, but bring us inside your tents and your room, name brands and sizes, and tell the audience about, what do you got going on in there?
Yeah, so I run, I've been running a 4x4 tent for years now. Currently, I have two Mars Hydro TSL 2000s in the tent. I've had those since the Beat the Best challenge last year. So since the August challenge last year. So run them through 3 cycles at this point. I'm thinking about changing all of this, to be honest with you. So we'll see. I think I'm going to downsize to a 2x4 tent. I'm overproducing right now, so I've sort of set myself up to grow 3 times a year with the challenge grows. I don't sort of do any kind of distribution of flower. Everything stays in my house because I run a website. I want to be really sort of careful about that side of things. And I'm running out of jars. I'm like out of jars. So I think I'm going to downsize to a 2x4 tent. And I might switch lights, but I'll finish telling you about my current grow right now. So 4x4, it's an Apollo tent. I'm not a huge fan of the tent, actually. That's another reason that I may change. I think the Vivo Sun tents are a better option for sort of the budget tent. And I think the Mars tents are a good sort of upgrade from that if you want a little bit of an upgrade sort of before you get to the Gorilla tent level.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not particularly happy. There's a few issues I have with the zippers on my current tent. I have the AC Infinity exhaust system, and I have the intelligent controller for that, which I really like. Although it wasn't able to sort of keep everything in the best situation on my current grow, and that's sort of one of the issues with it. Our challenge cycle is sort of set up to take the hottest time of the year off, but I always push into it with the spring autoflower challenge, which is just wrapping up now. I'm just harvesting it now. And climate in June and July is just really, it gets really humid in June, and then it starts to get really hot by July. The rest of the year, I can manage my 4x4 tent with just the 4-inch, and that's all I have is the 4-inch AC Infinity fan. But if I really want it to be growing in the summer, I need the 6-inch in there. It's just not quite enough to sort of power that through in the summer. I have a complete automatic watering system, which is one of sort of my most popular articles on cocoforcannabis.com, is my DIY automatic watering system. So it runs, there's a reservoir that sits outside the tent, a little pump in there that pumps into hydro halos that sit on every plant. The plants themselves are in air pots in Coco. They sit on plant risers in self-draining saucers. The self-draining saucers DIY tutorial is also a popular article on our website. So if you're interested in sort of my automatic watering system, or the self-draining saucers, or the automatic pumping drain bucket, all three of those are DIY tutorials that I have on the site. And that system allows me to sort of put the grow on autopilot, basically. During most of the grow, I fertigate 5 times a day with the automatic watering system. The self-draining saucers drain into the drain bucket, which pumps it into a separate bucket that sits outside the tent. So all I have to do is keep the res sort of stocked and clean, and make sure that the drain bucket doesn't overflow. And the grow sort of runs on autopilot for a good portion of it. I use the Atlas Plant Trainer. I'm not sure if you've heard of the Atlas Plant Trainer, Rob.
I was going to make a comment earlier on about how you're starting a plant training challenge at the same time that I'm sold out of Atlas Plant Trainers.
Trust me, this has come up amongst our steering committee as well, with much hand-wringing and consternation. I wish we had thought of this last year, because it's such a better idea for this challenge than what we had last year. I'm really excited about the idea for the challenge, and I'm really bummed. It would be like, we would love to have APT be like the headline sponsor of the Plant Training Grow Challenge, man.
Oh well, we'll be back. We're placing another small order, and we just want to make sure that everybody gets what they want and gets one last chance. It happened so fast that, like, literally, like, we sold 75 sets in the last 60 days, and I was like, where did they all go? What happened?
I knew this was going to happen. I was asking you that, if they were going to be like discontinued, because I'm like, I think there's a number of people that are fence sitters right now, and that have been like sitting on the fence and be like, I'll get that eventually, but not right now. That like spring, if they realize that time is limited. And I think you may have heard from some of my users that were in that situation.
I have.
But we'll show it off. I'll show it off again.
Plug it for that last 150 set order, Make it so that flies out the door, so I don't have to do any work.
Let me just put my full weight of recommendation behind it again. I love it. I would be really sad if I had to grow without my Atlas Plant Trainer at this point. It would just send me into a fit of depression. So I love the APT. I use it. I try to make sort of maximum use out of it. And I think it's an incredibly handy thing to have in the garden. So if you have the opportunity to get one, I certainly highly recommend it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I use that to train my plants. And, right now I have three autoflowers, all being sort of trained out in by one large set Atlas plant trainer says. So none of them have sort of a full Atlas plant trainer complement, but they're all sort of making do with what they can use. And basically filled the 4x4 tent with those three autoflowers. And the gross harvest, it's looking like 8 to 10 ounces per plant. I'm going to lose some though, and that's sort of the part that we talked about, some of the mistakes or learning opportunities.
Yeah, lead right into that. That's right where we're going. So
yeah. Well, the aforementioned climate has sort of created a difficulty. I knew I was walking a precarious line, especially as the colas started to really plump up. So the colas on two of the plants became really quite girthy.
mm-hmm.
And that's a dangerous combination with high humidity and high heat, which I've been sort of dealing with for the last couple of months in the grow. And so about a week ago, I was doing a sort of careful inspection inside the garden, looking and thinking about harvest window, and found a spot of bud rot, the dreaded bud rot. I know. And that was on like the biggest cola on the Think Different plant. If the biggest cola was like much bigger than the rest of the colas, that might be sort of a saving grace, but it's like barely bigger than the rest of the colas. They're all trained out in manifolds, so topped twice with 8 mains, and then they have about 16 to 24 tops on them. And yes, just to sort of, I can hear people questioning this in the background, but they are autoflowers, and I did top them twice as manifolds.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I cut off that cola. It was just one spot of bud rot, but it was into this whole sort of section. The colas are pretty big, and the sort of top part that's all sort of bud encrusted was probably 16 inches or so, and 2.5, 3 inches in kind of diameter. And it seems to me that the bud rot almost always forms like 4 inches from the top of the cola in like a 3-inch band there, like not quite at the top, but near the top. And it seems to sort of colonize that area of the cola first. It's also sort of corresponds with the thickest area of the cola. And so I cut that area out. I was able to save some of the surrounding buds, even on that cola. I'm a believer in that the bud rot is not toxic to humans. It's not appealing, and it dramatically affects sort of the psychedelic properties and the medicinal properties of the cannabis and the cannabinoid synthesis, but it's not really a risk, a danger in terms of contamination or other issues like that. It's botrytis, and we have a lot of experience sort of dealing with botrytis in other horticulture and agricultural experiences where it's not harmful to human health. In fact, it's used in making certain wines and other things like that. So I removed the affected area and threw it away and tried to save, the buds that were far enough away from that to not be concerned about them being contaminated. But then I took down the other plant. I took down the AK plant that I was growing. I did not notice any bud rot on it when it was still in the garden. But I did the rough trim on it last night, and it had rot in 3 of the colas, and it's got like 24 colas or something. So it's not like the end of the world, but I'm going to have to check the rest of it like more carefully when I go through and do the close trim. Might find a little bit more. I tried to be pretty careful about it where I found it. But it's always like the best sections and the thickest buds, and then like what would have been the nicest looking buds. And it just sucks to sort of throw it away. So far, it's wet, but the dry weight on what I threw away so far would probably be like 3 ounces.
That's not horrible. That's not horrible.
No, and I've got
But it
probably,
hurts. It hurts.
yeah, I got probably 7 ounces from that plant hanging up. So, 30% loss from like a 10-ounce
So
plant.
our audience is sitting at home, thinking like, if Dr. Coco, with all of his experience and skills and
Yeah.
scientific background, is getting bud rot in an indoor garden, what am I going to be able to do to prevent that from happening? And from your experience, what can they do?
Yeah, so let me sort of explain that. I mean, I knew I was in a risky situation.
Yeah.
I've known since the beginning of June, and I mean, I knew since before I dropped these seeds.
You knew after last July that it was probably going to happen again this July.
Although I got through last July's harvest was crazy, but those plants grew sort of much bigger, much taller. And they ended up being a lot less compact. It was easier, I think, then to manage airflow. And I didn't have issues with rot on that grow. I did have issues with rot on grows before. So it's part of it is the plants themselves. This is one of the reasons that I run main lines or manifolds, is to distribute the apical dominance so that you don't end up with one sort of gigantic bud cola on the top of the main stem. Because it's those sort of thickest colas that create conditions that sort of foster the rot. So that's part of it. You want to train the plants to distribute the apical dominance. Now, I did that. The thing is, I have a lot of light. 2 TSL 2000s in a 4x4 tent is a lot of light. It's a fully lit grow space, if people are wondering about that. And by the way, it's a really sort of affordable way to fully light a 4x4 tent. Stop by our grow light guide and check that all out. But I actually ran a par test on one of my TSL 2000s, and I have a fully lit grow space. I'm confident in that at this point. So the colas grew large anyways. I mean, I take pretty good care of my plants. I have an automated system that keeps them with all of the things they need for good growth. So the colas grew pretty fat, and I need to keep the climate really in pretty tight parameters, especially the last 6 weeks of flowering, to avoid bud rot. Everybody does. If you have, colas that are thicker than like an aluminum can, right? Like a beer can or a Coke can or whatever.
Yep.
And it's like I was talking about with the sort of setup in the first place. My climate here, I live in LA, and in Los Angeles, we have like the ideal climate for growing indoor cannabis 9 months out of the year. So I have the infrastructure that's appropriate for those 9 months. I take about a month and a half off, and then there's this month and a half in June and July that I shoot myself in the foot. I mean, that's the other sort of month and a half that I shouldn't be growing. Or I would need either air conditioning, and my office where the tent is really doesn't get enough of sort of our central air conditioning. So in order to get it cold in my office, I need to like really crank down the air conditioning. It's just really wasteful, and it makes my wife freezing cold. Or I would need to set up an air conditioner in my office, or at the very least, I would need to increase my cubic feet per minute of my exhaust system.
Yep.
But I don't even think that increasing the exhaust would fully solve this system, because it gets up into the mid 80s in my office in terms of temperatures in here. So it's just tough. I need to not probably grow in July, or invest in infrastructure to grow in July. So I think the lesson there is to have the right equipment for the climate that you're growing in. And if it runs consistently into the triple digits, which right now we are consistently in triple digits temperatures here, then you need air conditioning. You need to really have a grow setup that can manage that heat effectively. If you deal with high humidity, you need to have either really good airflow and air circulation, or you need to dehumidify. And so I think my issue that cost me on this grow is just, the climate changed out of the parameters that I'm sort of prepared to manage it with.
So through all of that was really great. I couldn't help but thinking.
Yeah.
You say that you typically have 3 months that you shouldn't be growing, and you take a month and a half off.
Right.
And finishing in the middle of July always is, problematic.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Why don't I change things?
Well, I mean, if we're only worried about a month and a half and there's 3 months, why don't you start seeds now, and then you'll be done at like the beginning of June, and then the month and a half off that you take is when it gets really nasty and you're not harvesting during that.
June is really because of the humidity. July and August is because of heat.
Yeah.
Although I can start plants in August because heat is much less of a problem for seedlings.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking, is we're not going to worry about the heat. We're not going to worry about the humidity really in for seedlings and veg.
Well,
so
I have to worry about the humidity for a few weeks. I have to worry about the humidity from the time that they leave the humidity dome, which they typically grow out of the humidity dome in 14. I can keep them in there sometimes as long as 18 days from seed gets wet before they're at the top of the dome. And then there's a period there that they're out of the dome, but they're not yet in final containers, and they're not yet producing enough of their own humidity. That the relative humidity will be way too low here. And that is actually a tough situation, even to solve with the humidifier in the tent, although I can sort of deal with it with the humidifier in the tent. But yeah, so this isn't, unlike a lot of people, I don't just grow myself my own sort of crop. So I have a huge sort of calendar that I coordinate with. And a lot of it is centered around the New Year's Grow Challenge. The New Year's Grow Challenge that starts on January 1st. And the fact that it starts on January 1st is kind of an important point about the New Year's Grow Challenge. So that gets us into April, and it's really super convenient and kind of awesome that we're ready to start the next challenge right about 420, right? So we start the Spring Autoflower Challenge on 420. My deal, Rob, and I think the way I'm going to solve this is I'm going to grow the fastest autos I can grow. So I'm going to find faster flowering autos so I can be done by the end of June at the latest. I think I can skate through June. I think it's really pushing it into July that runs me into a lot of problems. And then, even that break, a lot of growers, when they finish the Spring Autoflower Challenge, they want to, boom, plant again, right? So if there's too big of a gap, people sort of fall off the calendar. And I like to keep growing together. So
right. So that's really what it comes down to, is the timing from the first grow challenge and why it has to carry in.
Yeah,
that makes sense. That makes sense.
We got to start in August because that grow, or we have to flip by October 1st, really, right? Flipping October 1st works really well because it gets almost every strain done before the holidays. So you harvest before the holidays, and then you don't have plants over the holidays, which allows people to go and visit family or do whatever else they want. You come back, and New Year's Day, you start your next garden. So that side of it works really well. The New Year's Grow Challenge into the Spring Autoflower Challenge works really well. It's this summer thing that's just an issue for me. And I recognize it's not an issue for every grower. A lot of growers live in climates where it's not a problem at all to grow during this time of year.
So besides reducing humidity and, better, I don't even know if better airflow is going to help in, that situation. Do you suggest anything else that growers could do? Any, if they see bud rot coming in and they're not quite ready to harvest, would you ever suggest,
Yeah, yeah,
cutting out the
yeah.
section and preventing it
When you
from
see it, cut
continuing
it.
to spread?
Absolutely. When you see it,
Yep.
cut it right below, cut the cola off right below that section where you found the bud rot. Get in there, dig around. I mean, you normally don't want to do this to your buds. You try to treat them like they're precious works of art, but make sure that you really understand where that bud rot goes down to. Cut it, a little bit below that. Inspect the top of the area after you've removed the infected area. Make sure that there's no sort of more bud rot there, and the rest of that cola should be able to continue to go on. Remain obviously hyper vigilant. And when you take that cola out, I usually find that there's a section above the rot that can be salvaged. But that can be sort of your personal preference, whether you want to save that or not. Again, I don't think there's any actual risks involved in consuming that.
So I'm thinking back to the one time that I really had bud rot in my indoor garden, and very similar type situation. I forget the name of the strain. It was white something, white rhino maybe. But this, I mean, these colas, I mean, they were just everywhere, and they were almost, maybe 1 liter bottle, soda bottle size, just dense. And as they were coming down, I realized when they were coming down that they had bud rot. And I was talking with a friend of mine, and his point was, I had really big, fan leaves kind of funneling into the center of that bud. And he said that if you do a better job at pulling those bigger fan leaves out as the bud's forming around them, the moisture doesn't, like the leaf kind of creates a tunnel for that moisture to kind of find its way in, because it kind of creates a bubble or a space in between the buds. So he suggested really doing a better job at pulling those bigger fan leaves out of the bigger buds before they're formed around them, so that the moisture doesn't have a way to get inside that bud. And then
I really got to disagree with this, with this sort of line of thinking. The moisture comes from the plant, so there's plenty of moisture in the plant. It is true that you don't want to have standing moisture on the plant itself or spray them or other things like that. But when you actually remove the leaves like that, it creates an injury right where you cut the leaf, and the plant will pump moisture out that injury and potentially infect the buds that way or get them wet that way. You want to leave those large fan leaves in place because they are the solar panels that are harvesting photons and creating all of, I think that excessive defoliation of the top leaves. Now, if you're really dealing with issues of high humidity, one of the ways that you can lower the humidity is through lollipopping, through removing some of the lower leaves. I'm not a fan of stripping canopy leaves like that. And I don't think that the moisture that you're really worried about is from the leaf or sort of funneling the moisture down the stem like that, or being connected to it. Moisture is really actually leaving the leaf there. So the plant is pumping moisture into the leaf from which it's transpiring. And if you want to cut that transpiration, then it's a good idea to remove a lot of the lower leaves and to really lollipop your plants. That will help limit transpiration, which can help lower the relative humidity in the grow space, which prevents the bud rot from forming in the first place. But I would leave the canopy colas as intact as possible. I think opening injuries is a site of infection more than it would be removing the chance for an infection.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for talking that out. So we're just going to wrap things up with a couple quick hitting topics or questions, I guess. Dr. Coco, what is one or two things? You said you needed 6, but I'm only going to give you time for one or two things one or two items that must remain in your garden in order for you to be successful, and you're not allowed to say you or the cannabis plant because those got to be in there.
Okay, so the light. But I think that that's really the sort of the only answer to that question. Although I can imagine other kinds of arguments for the answers, but I think that the light is the one thing as indoor gardeners that we need in a way that we really don't need it in other kinds of situations.
Yeah, but specific to your garden, is it your particular light that you need to be successful?
Particular to my garden, I need my self-draining saucers. I could do without the automatic watering system.
Okay.
That provides the water.
Yep.
But hell no, I'm not going to go in and manually drain my saucers. I mean, I feel so sorry for even growers that are like hand watering. It's fine. Keep hand watering if you want to hand water, but get yourself some self-draining saucers. So you don't have to move the plants, or like I've seen people using little pumps. I've seen people using turkey basters to try to remove runoff water from saucers, or having to manually pump the saucers or to do other things. And there are you could put a big drain tray or a drip tray or something like that, but I don't like to have a big wet surface in my tent. I mean, for the aforementioned relative humidity problems, to try to keep that contained as much as possible. And the self-draining saucers do a really good job of sort of limiting the exposure of like open sitting water inside the grow tent. So I added those before I added the drip system. And I think that, it would be hard to go back to not having self-draining saucers.
Great answer. I wanted to touch briefly upon strain selection and what is Dr. Coco's process, and is it strictly medicinal value? Is it a particular breeder? How do you pick the strains that you're going to grow out?
I am an eclectic, I think, in that regard. In terms of medicinal value, I've actually had lots of interesting discussions with my partner, Dr. Photon, about this, who also uses cannabis for medicinal reasons. We're often asked about sort of specific strains that affect our specific conditions. I suffer from ankylosing spondylitis, which is a form of rheumatoid arthritis. And people have written to me and said, like, I have ankylosing spondylitis, or somebody I know, what strains in particular? And my answer to that is they all seem to work. I haven't noticed a huge difference in sort of the efficacy of one strain versus the other. Strains that have a larger sort of effect on me in terms of like feel like they get me higher also seem to feel like they have more of an impact on my arthritis. And that may be because that's largely sort of the pathway through which, I'm feeling relief. There may be other pathways certainly involved in that, but some of the medicinal realities, to the extent that cannabis has a real medicinal benefit for ankylosing spondylitis, it's because active THCA will act as a TNF blocker, which I don't want to get sort of too deep into this, but it's really having active THCA, which is different than some other arthritis things where it might be higher in CBDs, or there might be a medicinal benefit from sort of the anti-inflammatory impacts of CBD. That doesn't appear to be what's giving me relief, is more sort of the high THC content, because THC can act as a TNF blocker, which is like what a lot of those drugs do that you see advertised, Humira, Enbrel, all those biologic injections are TNF blockers that go in and sort of block the production or block the immune system from responding to a particular protein. So strains, I like strains that are powerful. I like strains. I don't like the sort of highest THC strains. I do like a strain that has more sort of the lesser cannabinoids. And I prefer strains that are stable. My background in agriculture, it's wild coming to cannabis because there's really I shouldn't say there's a lot of uncoordinated and ill-conceived breeding in cannabis world in a way that we don't really deal with that. We deal with it differently in other kinds of agriculture. But like in the cannabis seed industry and the breeders, a lot of them aren't following any kinds of scientific breeding principles. They're just sort of doing selection on certain strains that they like, and then they're back crossing them to themselves and making S1s and calling that sort of the same strain, and the genetics underneath and what's going on is often getting muddled. So I try to stay away from some of that unless I know the breeder or I sort of understand what they're getting involved in. I tend not to sort of collaborate with breeders on Instagram or other people that are just kind of taking strains and crossing them and seeing what happens. I prefer working with breeders or growing out seeds that come from sort of known parent lines and are known crosses from those parents. So true F1 hybrids, really, which is a different style of breeding than even some breeders are pursuing with going to like F5s and F6s, things like that.
Cool. Well, let's wrap things up there, Dr. Coco. Do you have any last bits of advice, anything we didn't capture that you wanted to make sure we hit in the interview today?
Yeah. So last bits of advice, come join our grow challenge. If you're a new grower or an experienced grower, I think there's something for everybody to sort of get involved and learn from that experience of growing together, or, teach to help pass on some of the knowledge that you've gained from growing and to share that with a new crop of growers coming up behind you. So our next challenge is starting here in August, and I hope everybody comes and signs up at cocoforcannabis.com/challenge. While you're there, we have a chat room, a growers forum. You can start journals about your grows. You can often find me or other really experienced growers hanging out in the forum to answer questions, or in the forum or in the chat room to answer questions. And yeah, you can find me there. You can find me in your Slack channel. I will come by and spend an hour. I'll do a sort of live listen with this episode. Listen along live and hang out in the chat room with or your Slack channel with anybody that wants to come and ask questions there. And sort of for the advice, I think that this advice will ring true to a lot of your audience, but it's to find a community and to be part of something, to not have to feel like you need to grow alone. So that's really our main slogan is grow your own, but don't grow alone. Let's grow together. So to find that community, to feel like you have a community of growers around you that you're part of, that you're contributing to, that will be there to support you and to help you when you have difficulties and be there to celebrate with you when you have successes. So I think you guys are setting up a cool community with the Slack channel. We try to do that with our forums, with our challenges, and with our chat room. So find a community and try to take your grow out of the closet in that way.
Awesome. So guys, head on over to Coco for Cannabis. This is going live literally days before the new challenge is set to kick off. So this will be live on August 13th.
Well, this, and to let everybody know that if they can join now, they can join now. But if they can't start later, it's kind of a rolling start to this challenge. So our real deadline is to try to flip the plants by October 1st. So no matter when you're listening to this, if you still feel like I could flip some plants by October 1st, then it's not going to be too late for you to get into the Plant Training Grow Challenge.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for listening, guys. Thank you, Dr. Coco, for your time today.
Thank you, Rob, for having me.
And make sure you subscribe, share, rate, review, and we'll catch you next time. Happy growing, guys.